I'm Kurt Wagner.
And I'm Mike Epley.
We're old college debate teammates who disagree about pretty much everything as often as possible.
In each episode, we examine a question inspired by the week's events.
Despite our disagreements, we're friends. We respect each other, we keep each other honest, and we have fun doing it.
And most importantly, we drink.
Offering a fresh, informed snapshot of the debates that dominate contemporary discourse, this is Right Brain, Left Brain.
Hey, welcome to Right Brain, Left Brain, the champagne of podcasts.
This episode of Right Brain, Left Brain is brought to you by Spark Ale, a 21st Amendment brewery brew.
Yeah, it's a rosé beer thing.
Yes, it's a sparkling rosé ale with apple, cranberry, peach, and cherry. It is delicious. It makes my taint feel a little funny when I sip, which is what I look for.
That's what I look for in a beer. That's what they teach you in fancy beer school. Yeah. How does it make your taint feel? And then on the left side of the table, I have good old-fashioned, regular king of beers, Budweiser. Thanks, Dad. Gave me my taste for Budweiser at the ripe old age of whatever age it was.
Generations of alcohol abuse proudly passed down as a tradition. Yeah. You know, actually, now that I think about it, I don't really have a lot of alcohols in common with my father. My stepmom has a lot of allergies, so my dad has been stone cold sober for a long time. And I've never actually got to drink with him, which is good and bad.
Right. When your dad's an alcoholic, it becomes complicated to drink with him.
Yeah. Well, my mom has seen me at my worst.
Yeah.
My mom has seen me shamefully blacked out drunk at the movie Selma, which is supposed to be a movie about Martin Luther King, and then leaving.
I'm sorry, that came out pretty recently. I thought this was going to be like a story from your past.
That's the past. That was a couple years ago. And having like an angry argument with a Lyft driver where I was totally wrong towards him.
We also have Crown Royal here, obviously fine deluxe blended Canadian whiskey. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, you know, the one, the only Mountain Dew.
That's right. To alcohol. Cheers.
Thank you to our Right Brain, Left Brain listeners. Without you, we'd be sad. Sadder. We're millennials. We're always sad. We're actually Zennials. We talk about that.
Yeah, we've talked about this. And we're also not sad. Yeah. And we're also are capable of moving through space without looking at our phone, but that's a whole other thing.
Capable, yes. Although it's...
Do we always? No.
Yeah, I'm very
We're definitely...
begrudging. I had to take the garbage out last night, and I was trying to think of a way that I could bring my phone. Like, how fucked up is that? I was like, I got to take the garbage out. Literally from the garage to the street, I was like... Where's my Bluetooth headphones?
In your defense, though, when you finally get to the scene where the fist is about to go in, you don't want to tear yourself away from the screen.
You really don't. Yeah. Thank you also, of course, to our Patreon subscribers. Without you, well, we don't know what we would do.
Without you, we'd have to pay full price for our alcohol.
Yeah. Thanks to our Patreon subscribers. Without you, we wouldn't exist. Thanks, Mom.
Well, hey, what's going on in the world?
Well, recently there was a horrible tragedy committed by a horrible person in New Zealand. That person wants us to talk about them and debate the issue they want to see debated, but we are not going to do that.
And if you want to know how we feel about guns and mass shootings, we've done episodes on those topics. We're not going to give these people what they want by addressing them in the wake of their atrocities. Another thing I want to say is that I got to give a lot of kudos to the media who have not been saying this guy's name. Like, they still haven't been handling it as maturely as they could have and should have been, but they're better than they were a few years ago. So
yeah. Did you see the tweet? Did you see the tweet I commented on where somebody retweeted a picture of the guy's face and then said, "Don't show the guy's face." I commented, I am genuinely confused by this. Is this just the world's worst oversight?
And then you look at the handle and it's like, paradox tweets.
Yeah.
Every tweet on here, on this account, is a paradox.
Oh, God. Anyway, what else? Bernie Sanders' campaign staff became the first ever campaign staff to unionize. And I... as a donor to Bernie Sanders, I'm getting more campaign funding emails than ever.
And I am sure that my socialist union member father is going to give any inheritance I had any chance of getting to Bernie's campaign.
Thanks, Wag Senior.
Thanks, Daddy Wag.
Daddy Wag.
The state of Washington passed a law mandating that in order for a presidential candidate to be on their ballot, that candidate will have to submit 5 years of tax returns.
I wonder where that's coming from.
It's probably just a procedural thing they were thinking about hypothetically.
Yeah. After Donald Trump ordered House Republicans to vote yes, apparently, the House unanimously voted to make the Mueller report on, of course, the Trump-Russia collusion report public. So look for a future episode of RBLB on that once the report is out.
And I'm sure that after that report is released, everybody will come together and that the national political dialogue will become much more civil and unified.
Our first consensus since as a people.
Also worth noting is that in New York, a random dude, probably Italian, gunned down a mafia boss for reasons reportedly unrelated to the mafia, but that's according to the cops and the press, who have been accused and sometimes proven to shield the mafia. So who knows? But all we do know, definitely an Italian guy got murdered. Definitely an Italian guy murdered him.
Also, somebody let Grandpa Trump get a hold of his phone again as the president took to Twitter over the course of several days to insult used-to-be beloved Republican Senator John McCain. And I, for one, am still waiting on the stern rebuke from congressional Republicans over that one.
Well, he's been given one, but you know how Trump cares about stern rebukes, which is to say not at all.
Not at all.
In fact, I'm pretty sure that every time someone has given him a stern rebuke, that what he's done is he's turned around and said, "Oh, yeah? You can't stop me from, like, eating out of this dumpster," or like,
"I live in the dumpster now.
Yeah.
I just put a Trump sign on the dumpster."
"Telling me not to eat this turd? Well, look, it's all over my face and in my gullet. What are you going to do?"
God.
And I like that about him.
It's the shit eating that you like.
That's the old me.
And finally, Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang reached out to Ben Shapiro on Twitter on Wednesday to negotiate a possible appearance, maybe even a debate on universal basic income. Which reminds us, today we're discussing universal basic income.
So what's up with it?
Well, universal basic income, or UBI as it is colloquially known, is a concept that's gaining steam in America thanks to entrepreneur turned upstart Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang.
Universal basic income is exactly what it sounds like. It's a set amount of cash given on a regular basis to every American citizen by the government. The amount given, who it's given to, how regularly, where the money comes from, and other terms vary significantly from program to program and from advocate to advocate. But for the sake of this debate, what Mike and I are going to talk about is Andrew Yang's specific proposals for universal basic income. And that just happens to be the meat and potatoes of his presidential platform. He calls it the Freedom Dividend.
Freedom Dividend sounds a lot better than universal basic income. Because, all the conservatives are like, freedom?
Yeah. Well, I like it now.
Where's my dividend?
Can I get a Freedom Fries dividend?
God, this is why all of these candidates are missing out not hiring Kurt and Mike on their PR teams. Like, we've got all the ideas.
Andrew Yang, call us.
Lucky for us, trying to explain UBI to you, Yang's UBI plan is relatively simple. So his plan goes like this. From the moment that every U.S. citizen turns 18, they get $1,000 per month direct from the federal government. This money would go to every single American regardless of their need. This UBI, importantly, would replace some existing entitlements, such as, at least according to Yang's campaign site, quote, welfare, food stamps, disability, and the like, end quote. The remainder of funding would come from a 10% value added tax, according to Yang's website.
UBI is a relatively new political concept in the United States. So it's got a lot of people talking, some in fierce opposition, some in fierce support, and then some who are just intrigued by what seems to be an interesting or intriguing new idea that they'd never heard of before.
Yeah. As of now, how do people feel about it? Well, according to a recent Gallup poll, 52% of Americans oppose UBI, while 48% support it, which is pretty close to half and half.
And as we've seen from everything else that's politically divided by about the same number, It'll be peaceful and very easy to coexist between the two sides.
Yeah. Just logical.
Just like the last 3
debate.
years in politics.
Yeah, just goodwill on both sides, minimal personal attacks.
A lot of trying to understand the other side.
Yeah, just
and no personal demonization. And no talking about how much we hate this guy at 6 months after he dies.
Just measured conversation. But what are the real dividing lines? Well, of course, politics plays a big part, but also age plays a part. While most Republicans oppose and most Democrats support UBI, also most people over 65 oppose it and most people under 35 support it, with those in the middle feeling ways, in the middle.
People who oppose it say that it sounds like another government handout program that's just going to add to the debt and drive the country into the poorhouse.
And people who support it say that, well, the government already gives handouts to the rich who don't need it, while mostly ignoring the poor people who do. We can afford to do it, so let's at least give it a try. And that brings us to the question for the day. Is it time for universal basic income?
And I say, to borrow a line from classic social justice warrior Twitter, #time's up.
Oh, boy.
But I think it's an interesting alternative to existing social welfare. I at least like talking about it, even if I don't like the idea, because it's interesting.
And me, I'm into giving it a try. It's that plain and simple.
Well, what Democrat wouldn't want to try spending somebody else's money and giving it to other people to make themselves feel good?
Dude, what person wouldn't try that if you think about it? Spending someone else's money? It sounds fucking great.
If I'm spending somebody else's money, it's on pornography and heroin. All right. I'm not going to pretend that taking somebody else's money is about altruism.
But let's drink.
Let's. Mike Sonic Epley. Gotta go fast. Gotta debate fast.
That's me. That's my strange subtitle. But I live by it. All right. Well, here's what I got to say about UBI. So here's the deal. UBI is inevitable. It's going to happen. It's really just a matter of when is shit going to get bad enough to bring it out of the woodwork. So talking about AI and automation makes people's eyes glaze over, including mine up until recently. But these things are real. They are happening and they are going to continue to get worse. So administrative and clerical work, retail work, food service work, transportation work, and manufacturing work all make up about half of all jobs in America. And automation and AI are impacting every single one of those fields of work. First, let's look at truck drivers. Truck drivers are older dudes. They're not usually college educated, and they make good money. They make about $50,000 to $80,000 a year. The average one is like 49 years old. It's not going to be long before the trucks drive themselves. There's billions and billions and billions of dollars invested in this technology. Lots and lots of people are saying that it's going to be 5 to 10 years before you're on the freeway next to a truck that doesn't have a person in it. And these trucks are going to be like daisy chained together like railway cars going down the freeway at 70 miles an hour. It's fair to say that truck drivers are looking down the barrel of decreasing job availability and increasing competition for jobs. And furthermore, let's look at manufacturing work like auto workers in the Midwest, right? Retraining programs to try to get auto workers that were, of course, laid off after all of these plants closed down in the Midwest. These retraining programs failed like a motherfucker, famously failed. They never did better than 15% success. The best retraining program to retrain auto workers in the Midwest had a 15% success rate. Furthermore, MIT says that 83% of jobs that pay under $20 an hour are going to be automated away by 2030. And it's clearly already happening. Think about this as you check yourself out at Target with your earbuds in, listening to Right Brain, Left Brain. How many employees did you talk to the last time you were at Target? I personally don't think that I've spoken to a Target employee in like 8 months since the last time I asked them to open the display case for me so I could get a PlayStation controller.
I will say that sometimes I take out my headphones so that I can spit on them and call them stupid pores.
Oh, yeah. Well, not counting that, obviously.
Plebs.
I could go further into these areas, but I don't really think I need to. UBI would help the economy on a macro level. According to a study by the Roosevelt Institute, Yang's plan specifically would be good for the economy. The Roosevelt Institute says that the economy would grow by around $2.5 trillion and that economic activity would increase by about 8 to 10%. And furthermore, due to the increased economic activity, the plan itself would create 4.6 million new jobs, at least according to Yang's website. Furthermore, It would save a lot of money that we spend on systems like our incarceration system, the way that we deal with homelessness, preventable diseases. These are the kind of things that a UBI system can actually prevent from happening. As we see that poverty is the best indicator of likelihood of committing petty crimes, of course, poverty is the best indicator to predict homelessness, as well as the availability of going to the doctor to deal with preventable and treatable diseases. If we give people a little bit of money every month to take care of these things, to discourage them from committing any crimes and to, like, I don't know, save to get a job or go to school or whatever, or just pay their rent, we're going to see a lot of cost savings on the back end. But also, this would really help on the micro level. 4 in 5 American earners live paycheck to paycheck in America. That means no savings to start a business, no college savings for their kids, no buying a home, no down payment for a car, just avocado toast on payday, and that's pretty much it. For millions of people, it's even worse than not saving. Swiping an EBT card is fucking humiliating, I know from experience. I think a lot of people would forego their other entitlements happily if they could count on getting UBI every month. And finally, in academic debate, personal examples are not really allowed because it's considered to be kind of unfair because it's like unverifiable, right? I'm just telling you as if it's true to me, but I'm going to do it because this isn't academic debate.
This is right brain, left brain, and we're lying through our teeth every episode anyway.
Look, my dad, when I was a kid, worked the graveyard shift driving a street sweeper 40 hours a week. He made $8 an hour to support our family. We lived in a trailer in northern Florida, and my dad's income just could not pay all the bills. We routinely asked for money from my grandparents, who were living on fixed incomes, of course. My mom subsidized our household income by digging in dumpsters late at night, keeping and eating some of the food and goods that we got out of the dumpsters. And then the rest we would sell at the flea market on the weekends. My mom would often take me with her as a little kid to jump into the dumpsters and like hand her stuff so we could hit more dumpsters before the night was over. We got stopped by cops a lot. One of my classmates in the 4th grade saw me from his fence jumping in a dumpster by his house and outed me in class. It was like the most humiliating thing ever. I really wish that UBI had been a thing back then. And I'm just going to end with that. That's a little bit of a downer, but whatever.
Fucking Deborah K. downer.
It's definitely a good reason to drink.
Yeah. Literally, there's no better reason to drink than poverty. Or is that figuratively?
I laugh and I cry. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right. Did I break your heart and change your mind?
Well, you broke my heart with your bad argument.
Wow.
But my mind is
closed.
Is firm.
All right. What do you got to say? UBI, good or bad?
UBI is bad, and it's bad for a couple of reasons. Its proponents falsely assess the need for it, and then once we implement a program like this because of a false need, then we create an injustice in and of itself that just hurts people and helps nobody. But let me elaborate on that. There isn't now, and there is not going to be, some sort of permanent mass job exodus that's going to necessitate universal basic income. UBI is just another expensive handout that won't have net positive impacts. The scenario that Yang paints of a mass job loss is false. Yang, in the general UBI analysis of past industrial impacts on jobs, is provably false. Like, for example, you mentioned how Yang focuses heavily on Midwestern workers. The truth is that the economy did change in the Industrial Revolution and then in different industrial responses to technology that have happened since. And entire sectors of the economy have disappeared or changed in ways where the jobs are different. New sectors of the economy come out, new technologies come out, they disrupt things, old jobs go away, new jobs come in. And look, the truth is that people who shoveled horse shit and drove horse carriages found new jobs, and so did typists and elevator operators, right? Like, as the technology for all these things became more advanced and you eliminated these jobs, it also coincided with other new technologies coming out and other products and services coming out that created new jobs. So like when Yang looks at the past and he makes that fatal misassessment of how technology affected the job market of the past, because what it did is it got rid of dirtier jobs and replaced them with cleaner, better paying jobs that required more skill. Yang completely misassesses the status quo too. Yang says that, for example, call center workers will all be replaced. And that's what tech people said 20 and 30 years ago. But in reality, when you still call like any call center number, I don't care what the best call center in the world is, you're still just mashing random buttons until you get an actual fucking person. And every time that someone says, I've got the new AI that's going to make your call center irrelevant and people are going to like talking on the phone to a robot. Yeah, fucking right. Fucking
I love
right.
talking to robots. They allow me to say mean things to them that humans would never stand for.
The only robot I want to talk to is a sex robot.
Oh, that's what I meant.
I'm into that. Being mean to sex robots is my fetish. Yang makes all these analyses about how self-driving vehicles will be able to get rid of drivers. But the truth is that analysts have confirmed that not all jobs predicted will disappear as automation takes over driving. In fact, specifically for truck drivers, there's more people who are closer to the expertise of what's going to happen that are saying that instead of getting rid of truck drivers, the truck driver is going to sleep for long stretches of driving. And then where it becomes dangerous inside the city, and in suburban streets, that's when the actual person will take over, right? So there's just as much evidence to suggest that technology will change truck driving and car driving in a way where it's safer, but that we still have to employ people, or that we still employ some people. And then at the same time, we create other new jobs to eliminate or to replace some of the jobs that have been eliminated. As I mentioned before, Yang is stuck on these tired stereotypes of the Midwest after their economic shifts. I grew up there. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, before I moved down to Dallas, Texas as a teenager. And I'm tired of this stereotype because it's predicated on data. Yang cited different retraining programs. And when Yang cites these programs, he's only citing government programs, right? So he's saying government programs only got people up to 15%. But the truth about the economy of the Midwest is that it's much better for people who are poor and working class than it is in the coastal enclaves like New York and San Francisco. And that's partially because the economies of that part of the country have actually recovered quite well in the favor of the working class because, there's more ways to retrain and re-enter the economy than the narrow lens of a government training program that, newsflash, government programs tend not to work very well, right? So Yang is ignoring the things in the marketplace that retrain most workers, and he's just taking this narrow lens of government programs weren't very good. Well, when's the last time a government program was very good at anything, right? When we find solvency in this country and in this world, it's because of things that happen in the private economy, and very, very rarely because the government comes in and acts like Superman and effectively saves the day. And if anything, government is like Superman throwing a truck onto you.
You just come up with that?
Yes, on the fly. Aren't you proud of me?
That's pretty good.
What we know about the economic data about the status quo of the United States right now and economic data over the last several decades is that if what Yang's doom and gloom scenarios were saying would be true, is that right now 80% of us would be out of a job and all of us would be sucking dicks for nickels, right? Begging for the one rich person.
I don't want that kind of competition.
Yeah, I know. I like to do it for free. If past predictions of economic Armageddon were true after industrial and then computer revolutions and other technological revolutions, we would not have 4% unemployment right now, and we would not have the best rate of rising wages for the poor and middle class that we've had in 20, 30 years. Yang is just another tech person offering predictions based on siloed information that reflects what people think in the tech world, but it doesn't match the complicated, diverse nature of the actual economy that they're trying to disrupt. Really briefly, tech gurus have been trying to tell us that automated cars would never cause fatalities, that rideshare would reduce cars on the road instead of adding them, there'd be 10 million self-driving cars by next year, that the Hyperloop would already be whisking us between cities. But the truth is that UBI is just another handout that doesn't help anybody, and it just creates a tax cost that is not worth it and cancels out a lot of the benefits. You already know from past episodes why I think welfare programs designed to help the poor and middle class actually hurt them. They're paid for by taxes, whether the tax is designed to be paid by workers or wealth generators. Yang admits that the taxes will be paid by the same consumer who is receiving this universal basic income. Consumers, individuals, determine the prices of their products, the value of their labor based on their cost. Taxes are a cost. The quality of life is determined by cost of living relative to availability of the goods and services you need. This is why welfare-heavy states like California, New York are so expensive. The governments of those states promise and sell welfare to their constituents, telling them that it's going to raise their quality of life and give them benefits, but all that it ends up doing is jacking up the cost of living and diluting the value of the welfare that they get in return. It's honestly better to live in the Midwest and be poor and have no welfare, but be able but still make enough money that you can get by, than it is to live on welfare in large parts of California, right? And the truth is that Yang's universal basic income program bites into this. The inflation eats up the benefits of the program, and it just makes it harder to be poor the more the welfare we add. And he's talking about adding the most welfare basically that we've ever added in our entire lives if you accept the math of what he's proffering. So in summary, I don't like it because, again, I think that the reasons for it existing are not going to materialize. They're not materializing now, and that it just ends up creating a program that hurts poor people and working class people.
Well, I'm going to move to the Midwest and get welfare. How about that?
Perm do both. Classic debate tactic. That is to say, permutation.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Whew, I keep thinking it's not going to be whiskey, and then it is. We got to get another bottle back in here with like one of those corks because I missed that funk sound.
Yeah, we do.
Maybe next week. All right. Kurt said a lot of shit. I have a lot of shit to say back about the shit that he said. So one of the first things Kurt talks about is this idea that automation and AI really aren't going to displace all these jobs. Like he mentions call centers. He's like, you can just push buttons and you'll eventually get a human on the phone. But are you serious? The job has been shrinking for decades. I mean, I remember like my grandparents complaining that they couldn't get a person on the phone. The human you sometimes get on the line also frequently is not in the United States. So it's not particularly useful to this conversation that you can get someone in Bangladesh on the phone when we're talking about American jobs. Furthermore, manufacturing. The auto assembly line is nothing but robots now. There's nothing that Kirk can say that's going to explain that away.
Actually, I can point out that as we add these robots, we have to add all kinds of other human jobs to mine the robots. And you're right that there are less jobs in those sectors overall, but the economy employs more people overall. And as far as your point about call centers, I just want to mention that we both agree that the situation has not changed very much, despite everybody telling us that things are always going to change very rapidly. And you know what?
It's not only robots now, right?
Yeah,
I can give you that.
Whether or not that employs somebody in another country or somebody here, there's lots of like information about how as we've shipped jobs overseas for call centers, a lot of those jobs have to come back because eventually people will switch to a product that they can get competent tech support. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I'm not saying that, look, we've shipped an enormous amount of our economy overseas. You're right about that. And I want to give you that point.
Do you ever get those weird scammer calls where it's like someone pushing a button? You're like, hello? And it's like, hello, I'd like to speak to the head of the household. Click. And you're like, who's this? Are you the head of the household? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Thanks, AI.
We'll know that automation has fully taken over when you call the sex line, and it's one of those. It's just like,
get off the phone, hooker bot.
Hooker bot. Okay. Furthermore, if we talk about retail, right? Storefronts are closing all over the country as Amazon makes the shopping center more and more irrelevant over time. Amazon in these gigantic giga, factories or whatever they're called. I think I'm mixing Amazon with Tesla, but it's the same thing. They have gigantic facilitation centers, right? And yeah, they're manned by people, but I've heard that if you go into an Amazon factory, it's like tons of robots buzzing around.
And I'd be willing to bet you that an Amazon warehouse has way more robots today than the first generation of Amazon distribution warehouses.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hinting at here, and I think Kurt is like giving me at least a little bit of ground that like automation is real. A company that can save money by not having to hire a person and pay health insurance or pay sick leave or pay time off for X, Y, or Z, they're going to pay for the robot if they can save money on it.
Fuck all of that.
Yeah.
When I go to McDonald's, I skip the line full of morons.
You just go straight to the touchscreen?
Because you know what? Right. Because you know what doesn't happen at the touchscreen? I don't have to have arguments at the touchscreen with a clerk who doesn't understand the product that they're selling. Like, for example, if you go to McDonald's and you ask for any sandwich, they won't put mayonnaise on it by default. I'm a white person. I'm heavily invested in whether or not I get mayonnaise. I've been looking into this for decades. And
I do not want McDonald's mayonnaise. I draw the line there.
And I've known from experience that if you do not say add mayonnaise, you do not get mayonnaise on your quarterback. And yet I frequently have this thing where I go up to people who like say, you don't have to say add mayonnaise. We put mayonnaise by default. And then I'll test that.
That's not true.
I know. And then I'll go to that same clerk later and not say add mayonnaise. And then no mayonnaise gets added. I'm like, what's up with this? He's like, well, because the point is
He's
that
like, I'm the clerk. I don't make the sandwich.
Right.
You got too much fucking time on your hands at McDonald's.
No, I've got too much yearning for diabetes. My point being is that we're picking these robots in places where they make sense and they do a better job.
Yeah.
And no disrespect to a lot of hardworking people I've known that worked at McDonald's.
Yeah.
I've just had enough bad clerks that are bad at their job that literally a robot can do their job better.
Well, and that's the thing. It's like if you can just push the button and then a machine can pass the buns and pass the burgers and heat it up and spit it out of the end and wrap it for you, that's going to be a more seamless process. It probably costs McDonald's less to do. They're going to be doing doing it. That's just my whole point, is that like this stuff is happening. People are going to be losing jobs. Now, let's move on to talking about costs. So Kurt hasn't specifically talked about how much this plan is going to cost, but a lot of people are critical. A lot of people say it would cost like $3 trillion a year or whatever.
Yang offers his own figures on what he thinks. He goes extensively on what he thinks it'll cost. And I don't know. We don't disagree on the cost to the government. You know, it's one of those things where like based on the math, it comes out to be a certain number. The debate is about whether or not we'll see returns.
Yeah.
On that actually justify
exactly.
the cost.
It's like how much is the upfront cost versus how much is the net cost going to be after a year, because with added, whatever when you count against different welfare programs that are getting folded into, and when you count against new economic activity, right? It's all a balance sheet at the end of the year. But at the end of the day, I would say that it's not untenable, right? We could do it for a year and reel it in if it doesn't work out, for example. Or we could do it for a couple of years and see how it goes. Like Donald Trump's tax giveaway to the rich has already increased our debt by $3 trillion, right? That's $3 trillion. That's in theory a year of UBI. Worst case scenario, we just give the handouts to the poor instead of the Waltons and fucking Lockheed Martin and call it a day and see how it goes, right? So let's talk about the value-added tax. So one of the ways that Yang wants to fund this thing is through value-added taxes. Now, there are 160 out of 190 some odd countries who already have value-added taxation, including all of Europe, whose VAT is generally around 20%. Yang wants to do 10% here in America. That is sustainable. I think that, of course, there are some problems with it. I'll talk about that a little bit more later, but it's not like it's going to break the bank, and it's definitely not like it's going to drive up inflation because it's not an unfunded mandate. Yang's like, we're going to pay for it by raising taxes. It would, in theory, only drive inflation if we were to be printing new money to pay for the program, but we wouldn't be. We would be redistributing money to pay for the program.
That's what people like Yang always say, but the truth is that any time that the authority issuing currency goes into debt spending, like that does contribute to inflation. It does it less than just fiat printing more currency. But then another complicated aspect of all this is that our debt actually makes it where even though people say that that's going on, we do actually just print more money all the time. And this is why inflation continues to go up.
Well, the Fed printed $4 trillion for the bank bailouts, and there was no measurable change in inflation. That was $4 trillion, right? Andrew Yang is trying to go for $3 trillion. So give us a year of UBI, assuming that inflation's not going to rise any more than it rose with the $4 trillion bank bailout, and see how it goes.
I think that it's interesting that you make that argument, because I'm sure that there would be other debates where if I was defending capitalism and I said that there was no inflation from the bank bailout, you would be like, that's impossible. There's no way that we just miracled $4 trillion after these people embezzled it, and like look at how much things have gone up in cost since then. Our government would say that they haven't done anything to create inflation since the year 2000, but have the costs of goods and the cost of living gone up since the year 2000? The answer is yes. That even though everybody will say nothing's caused inflation since the year 2000, the cost of goods and services has inflated.
Yeah. We've increased our national debt. We've spent money that we don't have, right? And we've been printing money and putting it into the economy, those things.
It's also the catch-22 where as an economy adds value, that also adds to inflation. So I'm not saying it's all that, but I'm just saying that like I've gotten to a point where I'm skeptical of anybody who says, oh, don't worry, this unfunded spending won't add inflation. I'm like, okay, sure. Why don't we rein the budget in and then have like 5-10 years of a balanced budget and then see how much inflation is? Because I bet you it'll be a fucking lot less than when we have deficit spending.
In order to do that, we'd have to raise taxes.
And we'd also have to stop killing each other over one side or the other, switching sides about which one at the moment hates or likes more taxes and hates or likes more spending based on thwarting the other side and just opposing them.
Right. But I'm not a fool, and I'm not actually like a diehard lackey of Yang. I actually do think that UBI, according to Yang's plan, would probably contribute to inflation. If every single adult in America has $1,000 more in their pocket every month, all these people who are selling stuff are going to be like, hey, more shit to sell. We can raise prices, right?
And at the same time, everyone's also using that $1,000 a month that they're getting out of that's raining down from heaven, and they're paying an extra value-added tax, then there's no way that that's not inflation.
Yeah. So
you're literally inflating both ends of the pie. There's no honest way not to call that not inflation.
So I would say, even if I were to grant to you that there would be some inflation, and it is impossible because it's so complex, it's impossible to predict. We have people who have spent their lives studying economics and none of them can agree, which means you and I definitely can't possibly predict what's going to happen in terms of inflation. But I would say that I actually believe it is safe to say there would be some measure of inflation. But I will say that I don't think it's imaginable that the increased cost associated with inflation will amount to the $1,000 per month per person that the UBI would be contributing. And so for the listener, I would just say you have to just kind of gut check this. What kind of price increases are going to add up to $1,000 per month that are going to make it more expensive to have this program per person than it is in the status quo where they already can't afford to buy anything?
I mean, I would push back and say that, again, when you compare us to the rest of the world, the only countries where the poorest and middle class have the more ability to buy anything are places where it's neck and neck, and then you have other trade-offs that make us apples to oranges rather than even better or worse. Like, honestly, I'd say that the most fair comparison of, say, the United States to Europe it's more fair to say that they're different rather than that they're even better. And I only say that the United States is better when I'm forced to say that one is better than the other. But anyways, so I have a question for you. So do you favor a version of UBI that replaces the existing social welfare scheme, or do you want one that goes on top of it? Because I know what Yang advocates, but I want to know what you think.
Yeah.
Are you going to kill all existing welfare and then make it just UBI, or are you going to keep
Actually, I don't want to jump too far ahead to common ground, but it's at minimum very problematic for a person who's already getting, say, $1,000 of disability in the status quo, that when UBI kicks in, their benefit doesn't increase at all. It just becomes UBI instead of disability, which is explicitly what Yang plans to do with disability, as well as food stamps and
that one
cash aid and other forms of welfare he's explicit about. I think that's very problematic because now that person gets the same amount of money every month and also just got a 10% tax hike on every single thing that they purchase.
Yeah.
And so that is a net loss for that person. I can't not acknowledge that that's the case. So in my mind, this program, it doesn't really do the kind of justice that it needs to do for the people who need this kind of help the very, very most. People who are above the very bottom, they can benefit, right? People who are like, oh, I get a couple $100s of food stamps a month. It would be amazing if I got $1,000, right? I would happily give up the 200 food stamps to get 1,000 cash, right? Those people, I'm like, yeah, balance that against the increased VAT, balance that against whatever risk of slight inflation. Like, it's going to be a net gain for the majority of poor people. But the people that are already living on some form of social safety net, the more they're living on it in the status quo, the more this program is going to hurt them. And really, the less reason they have to support it, right?
Yeah.
People who are getting $1,000 a month from the government already, none of them that do their research are going to support UBI.
Yeah. And
to get back to like answering your question, it becomes difficult for me because we definitely can't afford to keep all these programs and give everyone $1,000 a month. Right? That's $3 trillion more a year. Where are we going to get that money unless we change the top marginal tax rate to 90%, which I would support. So it becomes a different conversation.
Donald Trump is having to steal, thanks to the emergency declaration order, which we debated about on the Patreon episode. So go subscribe on Patreon and listen now. But Donald Trump has used his emergency declaration order to rob from the funding of various construction projects like, say, new barracks or a new Pizza Hut on Camp Pendleton in order to fund his wall. And he's just looking for $5 billion as, in theory, a one-time expenditure. Okay, so we briefly mentioned on inflation. I'm not going to drill down on too much on it because Mike and I had a realistic conversation about it already, but the rate of inflation is highest in states with extensive welfare programs. Debt spending is one of, if not the biggest driver of inflation, depending on who you ask and what kind of debt. And this would be the biggest welfare program ever. Yang even admits this openly. Again, this always goes back to the argument that welfare will help the economy, but really it just adds to inflation instead. And I do want to echo your point. You were very real about your situation. I'm a military veteran. I'm rated 60% disabled according to the VA due to the injuries I sustained in the military. And because of those injuries, there's all kinds of jobs in the world that if I weren't injured, I would be immediately qualified for. Like, for example, in San Francisco, police officers are paid very well. They start at the high fives or near six figures. Because of my disabilities, I can't go for that. And that's what I'm most qualified for doing after serving in the military. The military, or I should say the Department of Veterans Affairs, gives me, at 60% disability rating, $1,200 a month. And so I am that person that you're talking about who right now I'm in a position where after years of rehabilitation, I can work full time and I can make a living. You know what I mean? But I've had to train hard to do something new. And there were months where I had to make it on just my veterans disability of $1,200 a month. If there were overall inflation and then a value added tax, I would be one of those people who's eaten alive and not able to avoid starvation or pay my rent, which, you know, before that $1,200 a month when I was too sick to work and I couldn't work, right? Which had happened to me. I at least covered my rent, you know?
Right.
And then my ability to just cover that rent, let alone buy food, would be jeopardized. But we've sort of agreed on that. And then from there, I think it's up to the viewers to chew on it. I'm actually ready to move on to common ground because there's a couple things I want to acknowledge. And I can go first unless you want to go first.
Yeah, go ahead.
So as much as we've talked about UBI, I think that what we've determined from this is that UBI would essentially be changing the existing welfare state from one that sends targeted amounts of aid to targeted groups to get targeted results to one that just generally gives a general hand up to everybody with less specific, reaching out and less. Would you agree that that's basically what UBI is proposing?
Yeah.
It's proposing a turn from targeted handouts to the groups identified as the neediest to like a general hand up for everybody and hope that works better.
Right. Yeah.
And
I've heard a few conservatives who are on board with it because they're like, yes, this will be a way we can get rid of welfare, and you know what I mean? Yeah. And that's so, the way they frame it. Yeah.
And I want to do two things where I want to admit what I like about that as a conservative, but that what I also, as a person who has his own independent thought, like I want to admit that like there are some people who are super vulnerable that are threatened to be left out in the cold and worse off under this scenario, and the reason why we have special disability funds for them is to avoid that, right? But at the same time, at least my conservative intellectual part believes that I could actually live with UBI if it were adjusted to a dollar amount per person that is equivalent or less to what we spend overall averaged per person on welfare. But again, this goes back to that philosophical dilemma of it being a targeted thing for targeted groups versus a general hand up, right? So if we could spend less money or the same amount of money, then it's at least theoretically possible that conservatives could lower their rejection of this enough that it could at least happen, whether or not it's a good thing or not, right? That's a whole other debate that we've moved past.
Yeah.
UBI, as quirky and wonky as it is, why don't we just start a universal basic income program funded 100% by voluntary donations by people that want to see a UBI program? This is sort of the critique that a lot of us on the right offer to the youth on the left who are saying the government needs to spend this money on this social welfare aid program. And then people on the right are like, okay, well, why don't you spend your money right now? No one's stopping you. I'm not using that point as sharp as a rebuke as I may offer it sometimes, or other conservatives may offer it in some instances. I think it would be kind of interesting to see what would happen with that. The state of Alaska has its own UBI program that sort of dovetails in with a leaner state. Like Alaska is not the most welfare heavy state, although with time they keep adding more welfare benefits. But I think that as a generality, they do offer less welfare benefits and more UBI.
Yeah, Alaska not just frames it, but really does pay it as a dividend. The amount they pay once a year to every resident of Alaska, and it's based on their oil revenue because they have some state kind of entanglement with the oil industry from Alaska through the tar fields and through the pipeline, right?
Yeah.
So the money that the state makes, they pass into a law like, okay, that money, instead of it just going to the government, we're actually going to just pay a dividend to everybody in Alaska based on how much money we made, right? And it's like $1,000 a year, a couple $1,000 a year, sometimes as low as a few hundred, sometimes over 1,000, right? So it's significantly less than this national program, but it's really much more of a dividend.
And they're just like, instead of like spending it on a program, we're just gonna the states cut out. And it's interesting. Two things that I actually didn't know that you just informed me of. One, I didn't know that the amount fluctuated every year. Mm-hmm. I thought it was the same every year and that they made decisions to adjust it. And I didn't know that it was paid out per annum. I thought it was paid out per month. So
no, it's once a year. Yeah. But I can kind of get on board with you. And we get to this later with like this like common advocacy. I'm not sure about the like every person who wants to participate can kind of thing, but I do kind of believe in doing smaller test markets. If a municipality or a state, for example, were to say, hey, we want to give dividends back based on these key industries in the state. If California was like, we want to give tech dividends back based on these taxes that we've imposed on whatever, or oil taxes or sin taxes or whatever it may be, we want to give dividends back to the people in the state. Like, yeah, let's see about it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't see conservatives being mad about that.
And see, that's the thing. Conservative anger at this is just at the proposal that you rush this into a federal proposal. Conservative is like, 10th Amendment, bro, do what you gotta. You know what I mean? Yeah. The states have the right to do whatever they want to do that's not specifically outlined in the rest of the Bill of Rights and the Articles of the Constitution if you believe in, constitutional conservatism. So like, that's why, as it turns out, Alaska is not at anywhere close to a Democratic state. It's not a purple state. It's a solid red state that is not going to flip to the Democrats ever in our lifetime.
Right.
And so it's a conservative state that does this program. Yeah. Did you hear, now that we're talking about it, I found this in my research and forgotten, did you hear that it was either the mayor or a city council member or some other prominent Newark political figure who was proposing that the city of Newark, New Jersey, my father's hometown, enact their own UBI program?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. Now it's like, now with a lot of skepticism, like, I wonder how long this will last. But hey, you know what? Newark, if you can make it rain UBI and have flowers bloom, God bless you and Mazel Tov. It's your money.
Yeah.
You get to do what you want with it. That's what the 10th Amendment says.
Right, right. Well, then for common ground for me, I've kind of touched on it somewhat extensively, so I'm just going to briefly repeat it. But in a world where, as I laid out, half of Americans control like 2% of the wealth of America, right? More Americans than not are living paycheck to paycheck. In a world where that's the reality for most people, I really believe that most Americans can really, really benefit from $1,000 a month. While that's true, I still think it's really, really problematic to the millions of Americans who are already living close to or even getting more than that in terms of different welfare programs getting shafted by UBI, right? And I just don't see a way that it's not shafting those people to put strains on things like disability or food stamps or other welfare programs, because it's only going to be a matter of time before Republicans are back in power and they start trying to cut social services, right? So you're straining these other programs, not to just directly attack Republicans, but it's true. They want to cut social services. Yeah. Like
it's not a secret.
Yeah. Right. So Yang's website specifically mentions $500 to $600 billion of funding for UBI coming directly from welfare programs, food stamps, disability, and the like, right? Those folks are going to get the shaft on this. All the people that are receiving money from that, especially if they're receiving close to the UBI amount, they're going to get shafted in ways that I laid out earlier. So for that reason, I think it is problematic. Some more consideration for those folks would need to be made. And before I would definitely vote yes for UBI, I would need to be shown how it's not going to hurt those folks. Or if we do it for like a year, I would need to be shown how it didn't hurt those folks, right? So that's a big one for me. But I don't know, what can we kind of agree on?
The most effective and sustainable and the least controversial programs that you could ever enact UBI at that level would be at the state or local level. And that would test a lot of these things without incurring a lot of the same risks and a lot of the same criticisms. And it would just be a hell of a lot easier to do.
Yeah, I'm totally with it. We also have Alaska setting an example of a program that Kurt and I both don't really have any problems with, right? Their program is popular. They pay dividends on their oil revenue in this yearly check to residents. So I don't know. Can we agree? Time to nationalize U.S. oil and pay a dividend?
Maybe that's a different debate. I definitely don't think I can support that. Don't know if Alaska's a definite direct allegory to going that far, but I think that, yes, we can agree. We can at least agree that Republicans are not up in arms about this horrible welfare state of Alaska, nor has that created a situation where Alaska's economy is unsustainable. Alaska's economy is very, very healthy.
Yeah. And I think a lot of Republicans actually, in principle, throw this concept out there, and it gets brushed over a lot by the left side because it's more easy to paint them as just evil. But they say something to the effect of, yeah, if you can pay for it, right? So I think we could kind of end on that, right? If it's something that could actually be done and it could help make Americans more prosperous, like why wouldn't anybody support it?
Nice work if you can get it. Nice program if you can pay for it.
Yeah. Thanks for listening.
I'm Right Brain Kurt.
I'm Left Brain Mike. Don't forget to share, comment, like, and review Right Brain, Left Brain. Review it, especially if you like it.
And also tell your friends, tell people in real life, but also share us on social media. I'm Right Brain Kurt on Twitter, Instagram.
I'm Left Brain Mike on all of those, except for Twitter, where I'm Mike Left Brain.
The show's accounts are RBLB Pod on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook,
YouTube.
YouTube. Yeah, we're on YouTube now. So watch on YouTube. Tell people about us on YouTube.
Until next week.
Don't trust anybody who says that they will teach you how to roller skate, especially if once a decade that you try and injure yourself very, very badly, because as it turns out, when you try one more time, you will still fall and injure yourself very, very badly. Thanks, wife.
Furthermore, if you're going to go to dental school, don't go to alligator dental school.
You know why alligators at alligator dental school are always mad, right?
Why is that?
Because they have all those teeth, but no toothbrush.
What's the best time to make a dentist appointment?
When?
2:30. See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye. Right Brain, Left Brain is Mike. Bleh. Right Brain, Left Brain is Mike Epley and Kurt Wagner.
The show is produced by Nick Bernardi.
And we have graphics by Bianca Crampton.
And the Right Brain, Left Brain theme song is written by Dysonor.
Dysonor. See you next week.
Thanks.